Hello and welcome to the Remaining Sane, Finding Peace in Our Chaos podcast, a podcast about both theology and police work. I'm your host, Will, and in today's episode, I interview a police officer and longtime podcaster, Mr. Steve Gould. In the previous episode with Dr. Justin Barnard, one of the things that we talked about in our active combat against nihilism is the importance of storytelling. So just as a reminder, this podcast is an exploration into the hypothesis that if a police officer is not actively pursuing the body of Christ, if he is not actively pursuing Christ, then he will more than likely end up nihilistic, cynical, or substance abuser. And one of the things that Dr. Barnard talked about in the previous episode is the importance of storytelling for police officers. So today I have on probably the most well-known storyteller for police stories in the country right now, and that is Mr. Steve Gould.
Thanks, brother, man. It's an honor to come on.
Yeah. Steve, can you go ahead and give us a little bit of a little bit of background, what you do, what your role in and outside of law enforcement is?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm currently a sergeant at a small regional police department. So where I work is considered like the hill towns of Western Massachusetts. So there's because of police reform and things like that, their towns are starting to kind of combine to save money and all those things. So a small department. Before that, I've been in law enforcement 16 years total. I started at the eastern part of the state, then had a little break, a little mid-30s life crisis, and we moved to California for 4 years, where I got the opportunity to work for LAPD backgrounds. I worked investigating insurance fraud, then came back to Mass, having Christ in my heart, left without it. I believe it or not, I left a godless state like Massachusetts. I went to a more godless state like California. Even my pastor out there was like, "Who comes to California to accept Christ?" You know what I mean? And then I came back here, but it's made all the difference in first of all, my entire life. And I'm really passionate about it because I'm not, I was raised, I know this is like not part of the question you asked me, but once you spin the top, I can't stop.
No, go for it. Yeah.
So, I raised Roman Catholic, and there was a lot of, when I look back on it, there was a lot of just kind of like going through the motions, and I include like CCD in that. There was a lot of like a lot more fear than like the saving grace of Christ. There was a lot more fear rather than reading and understanding scripture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's kind of like how I got soured to it, and I ended up in California. My wife and I were just going through a hard time in life, like spiritually. Like we didn't realize at the time. Now looking back, we do, but we paid money to do transcendental meditation certification. My wife was doing like yoga. She went to a psychic. Like I'm talking like we were wide open to anything. Mm-hmm. And let me quiet that. Sorry, bud. So my wife was really having a harder time than me. I was just kind of, pretty much, not quite, but pretty much a nihilist. I just like whatever. I really always I shouldn't say that, because I always had in my heart that there was something greater than me. There was a God. There was something like because when I got stressed out or when I got into tight situations, I would say things like, "God, if you're there."
Yeah.
If you're doing that alone out loud to yourself, like he's put it in our hearts. I know he's there, but there's too much ego involved in, being in control, and the being in control, and the whole movement, the New Age movement that we were kind of getting sucked up into, is a lot about you're the God. You make the rules. You decide your destiny. You believe it. You can see it. You can have it. Yeah. We weren't like wackos, but that was kind of like the train of thought. You know what I mean?
That's something that I've been, I'll bring up Chesterton again. So G.K. Chesterton is a philosopher just prior to C.S. Lewis. It's kind of when his time was. So
yeah, I listened to some of his stuff.
Yeah. So late 1800s, early 1900s. One of the things that he talks about is that as a society becomes rationalistic, as it loses God and tries to rationalize him all the way out, then that society becomes insane. And so, because there are some things about God that are we're never going to understand. They're wholly mystical. And so I've seen a lot in states that have gone quote unquote atheist, or just, not pursuing the Christian God, is that there's a loss of meaning. And then people want to try to find meaning a lot of times in and of themselves, because, yeah, once again, as humans, we know that there is something special about the human race, right? There is something
Right.
different between the squirrels and the koalas and the dogs and the animal kingdom, rather the earth and us.
And that's what vegans try to erase with the
Yeah.
vegan movement.
Yeah.
Like they're like us.
Yeah. But like we're trying to, glorify ourselves, but we also know that we're not perfect. Especially being police officers, doing our job not only makes you more in tune with the sin around you, but it also makes in tune with your own sin, because then you realize that, I'm messing up here, and this is stuff that I see that, I may have a problem with or criticize, and then I turn around and do the same thing. So getting beyond that, you were in California, found Christ in California, and then you came back to Western Massachusetts. Is that correct?
Yeah. So when we were out there, it was kind of like the sun was setting on my police academy certification, because when I was with LAPD, I was a civilian background investigator. So it's not a sworn position. In Massachusetts at the time would allow you 5 years total out of service before you had to redo a police academy. So the combination of that, the big impetus was my parents getting older, and we had another child when we were here. And we were like, every time I saw my parents, it was like 6 months or a year later, and they looked older every time. You know what I mean? You're like, oh my gosh, they're aging before my eyes. And so we wanted to get back here to be with our family, to be closer to our family. Yep. So we started there, Baptist church. And I think the Baptist thing worked because it's the antithesis of Catholic. It's like guy on stage, big screen behind them. They're singing the pop Christianity songs. And it's kind of like, I've never seen church like this. This is like, no limits. It's just like no tradition, nothing. That's, just me and God, like personal relationship, which is very appealing, which you can have in, mainline Christianity as well, but not the guitar and the big screen, but like the relationship. So it was very appealing to us, and a lot of amazing things happened after we were basically, called to Christ through the gospel. It's so hard to say, because it's like, that's the power of God to believe. So like I'm so legalistic about it, which is not good, but like I hate to say I accepted Christ, because it's like I had, that's the work of the Holy Spirit.
There's a lot of mystery behind that. And but also I get why people say that. I understand why people say that, and I also understand when people don't like using that term.
Right. There's nothing wrong with it, but it kind of bothered me. But so anyways, during the pandemic, our little church we were going to was part of a bigger campus, and a new head pastor came in, very nice guy. And it became like, they did like a talk on BLM. And this church I went to had like a high number of police officers that went to this church. And we were all kind of like, what the heck's going on with the church? They're bringing in a black pastor to talk about his childhood. And it's like, it was kind of like rubbed us the wrong way. We were like, not what I'm here for type of deal. And then they kind of completely hard shut down, and really dragged it on through the pandemic, just all online. And the online part was mostly worship stuff, like singing and songs and all that, high production value, all that. But so we watched, believe it or not, we just watched, the whole time we were doing this, we started to think, why are there so many denominations? It's kind of driving us crazy. Like, cause we start reading about other ones and we're like, I don't know. So we went back to the Reformation. We watched a documentary on Martin Luther. So right now we are what you would consider Orthodox Lutheran, if there's such a, no one uses that, but it's LCMS Lutheran. So the faults Martin Luther found with the church and the tradition it had built of abuse, the abusive parts, that he got rid of is kind of where we start. And I appreciate all Christian denominations that are similar to that, because we had tossed the church fathers out. And my point was, I want to know what the disciples of the apostles were doing. I want to know what the early church was doing, like the Catholic Church in the beginning, like before it was, what was their tradition and why did they do it? Because we were being told at the Baptist church, like, baptism is, he would say before baptism, there's nothing special about this. There's no magic happening here. This is just an outward sign. And then I just put all the places they mentioned baptism in the New Testament on one piece of paper. And I was like, it seems like it's more than that to me. It just seems like it. And then the Lord's Supper, same thing. I know, like, between Calvinists and Anglican and Lutheran, there's a real nuance, like, that doesn't, like, get in my head and bother me. Like, it's the Lord's Supper, and I believe it's a baptism, Lord's Supper are sacraments, and they're a free gift to strengthen faith from God. And that's it. Baptism is saving, but it's not absolute. Because what I like about the Lutheran church is they don't, like you said, the mystery of God, they don't try to figure out or come up with something like transubstantiation, like the Catholic churches with the Eucharist. They just kind of say, like, this is kind of a mystery. People were saved without baptism, but it seemed to be laid out as a preferred method to be saved. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And yeah, that's something that, once again, we can't rationalize everything around us, because God inherently is mysterious, and we will never understand all of the workings first of all, we're never going to understand all of Jesus' actions until we see the face of the Father. Number two, we're never going to understand how the Holy Spirit works in the world until we see the face of the Father. And number three, we're never going to understand the Father until we see the face of the Father. And so, there's a lot of mystery. And once again, this is not to dog on the goal of this podcast is not to dog on people's religious denominations, right? So we're not here. Yeah.
And I don't believe those people are like not saved or anything at all.
No, like we're not here.
That's not what I'm saying.
Like once again, I was saved in the Baptist church. From what I understand, you return to the church through the Baptist church. We're not here to sit here and dog on people,
right?
But one of the things that I've really wanted to stress is that the sacramental lifestyle that, for me, it's the Anglican Church. For other people, it can be different churches. Has provided, it is really one of the biggest driving forces to keep me from going insane while doing this job, right? Because we see all kinds of absolutely wild, crazy, and especially you, right? You don't necessarily see it in Western Massachusetts every day, but you're interviewing people, once or twice a week, right? Like, can you go ahead and get into what your podcast is and like how that started and all that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So sorry I got in the weeds so much with the theology.
No, you're good. You're good.
I'm just, I like talking about that stuff. It's important to me. Yeah. So when I was at LAPD Backgrounds, I was out of police work for that stint, but Backgrounds is made up of everyone from special agents, chiefs of police, captains, lieutenants, detectives, guys injured on duty, and sworn police officers. So it's this huge unit at LAPD that makes up this. They take on a lot of different walks of life in law enforcement. So we'd have lunch every day, and I would sit there and I would listen to, like, these guys. Some of these guys had like 40 plus years on LAPD. And they would tell these stories that were just like unbelievable, but they would tell them to us because we were fellow cops, whether active or not, in a certain way that was like no holds barred, just like what really happened, how they felt about it. I thought it was incredible. And the national climate for police was only getting worse all the time. And I just thought, like, if I could get these stories out to just even the general public, anybody willing to hear or even give it a shot to hear, I think it would make a huge difference. If people could really see what these men and women do on it, like the real job they do, even from the deputy from the Midwest to the copper at New York City, like because it's all interesting. Like people love to hear a cop tell their stories. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that was kind of what sparked it. And then I was like, well, these guys talk to me. I don't know if they'll talk to me being recorded. And they started to, and the background unit in LAPD was like the birthplace of it. And I was able to just like at lunch be like, hey, would you do the podcast? Would you? And way more than I thought were willing.
Mm-hmm.
And the stories they told, and retire guys are great too, because they're like, they don't care.
Yeah, I can retire whenever I want. They're still paying me my pension. I can say what I want. That's
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were telling me, and I started doing it diligently, and I did it for like 7 months. And you know how it is, because you're starting to do a podcast now, and it starts to be a grind, and then all those motivational memes you see about like keep grinding and all this stuff start to just be like, oh, because I was getting 150, 30, 20 listens per episode, and I'm like, man, people really aren't hearing it, so I took a break, and I took like almost a year-long break, and I signed back to my account because I didn't erase the podcast. I just left it up, and there had been downloads, like 50 to 100 downloads a day since I'd stopped. So I hadn't produced anything new. And I started getting these emails from people like, hey, why'd you stop the show? It's so great. I'm like, well, I never heard from you when I was doing it. Like, I got no encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
So I picked it up again with a lot more stricter. I was a lot more regimented. I was like, I'm going to really do this thing and follow through with it. And that's when I started to see, after a year doing that, that's when the hundreds of downloads became thousands of downloads. And now I'm happy to say the show, per month gets about 40,000 listens, which, if you told me that 4 or 5 years ago, I'd be like, no, that will never happen,
Yeah, I actually, in preparing for this, I Googled best police podcasts, and if you look at any top 5 lists, this makes it, the things police see. So I hope you're encouraged with that. I think that you are actively doing something good, like, for not only police officers, but everyone who listens to it, right? Everyone's entertained by some good police stories, but it's also important for these to get out, because we a lot of people think that cops are not humans. Like, yes, we are. Like,
we love violence, we love tragedy.
Yeah, like, that we're or that we're superheroes, and we're not either. I get just as scared and nervous and whatever as the next person, but I truly believe that being a police officer, like being a priest, is a vocation. It is a calling. And you can have all kinds of different people from different kinds of backgrounds, whether they're 18 generations of police officers all the way to my family is very academic. There's no police, any of that in my family. And I've found everyone, one of the guys that I work with, he didn't have power in his house till he was 16 years old.
Wow.
That kind of hillbilly. And then I've got another one who, she doesn't have to do this job. She used to like own restaurants and stuff, and this is just what she likes to do. But
God bless her. That's great.
Yeah. She's got kids and everything, and so, but this is you're going to find all kinds of different people, and so what that leads to is all kinds of wild, crazy stories, because not only do we live in fantasy land known as the United States, with all the crazy stuff that can happen here,
right,
but we've got all different parts of the country. I think that you've learned that my area of the country is known for we're known for having a lot of crazy people, and then just really wild, insane stuff coming out of that. When I went on your story or your podcast, I told this insane, crazy story that actually happened.
Yeah, that was a wild one. That was great.
Yeah, good. But I'm confident you've heard all kinds of just insane stuff. Would you mind? I don't want to be like pick your craziest story ever, but keeping it not explicit. Would you mind telling us, what's the wildest story that you have seen on the, or have heard on the podcast?
Oh man, there are a lot of them are explicit and horrible. You mean explicit like violent is okay, right?
Violence fine, just don't use the language. Don't. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not a big swearer anyways.
Yeah.
So one totally insane one from New York City. The guy's famous too. I would have written it down. Oh, Ralph Friedman. He's like at the most arrests in like U.S. In New York City history. They based TV shows off of movies. He had some of the most disturbing and crazy stories I've ever heard. So bad I was cringing when he was telling me. One of them I think is even too. The most extreme one I think is just a little too. I don't know. It's sexual and explicit and.
Yeah, we don't need to get into that. Yeah,
it's a little bit over the top. I don't want to put any bad thoughts in people's heads. But another one he had was he just piggybacked this story to the one I just told you. That's just nuts. He had a guy holding a little girl hostage in an apartment, and him and his partner that were there trying to talk him down. And the guy had a butcher's knife, just like a 4-year-old girl. And before they could do anything, rather than surrender, he just picked her up by the arm and lopped her arm off. She didn't make it. She ended up dying from that injury. And these are the stories that like it gives you pause. It's hard to interview when someone tells you something like that because you're like, I'm very disturbed right now. I don't know what to say. Like, did you kill the guy? Like, what do you do with that? And this guy had so many stories like that. There were everybody's built different, but I might need some time off after that. You know what I mean? And then, we've had ones that are like, I had a robbery homicide guy. I'm really sorry about that noise, bro. That's my water pump in my basement.
Not a problem.
All right. So a robbery homicide guy from LAPD, actually a good friend of mine. He solved a quadruple homicide with people burned alive. That was totally insane. I've had officers pull up on the highway after a crash and just center double line human head, just perfectly balanced on the double center line. I had one crazy from down south tell me about a hit he discovered from a 911 hang up call.
This is true.
Dude, that's that's a wild one.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
That has changed actually how like in the county I work on, I'm on a county board, and I hear some of the bigger towns, they go, yeah, we called back on the hang up and they said the kid was playing with the phone, and they'll say, close the call, I'm all set. I never close the call. I go to every 911 hang up because of that story.
Yeah, that's a really good one. At the end of this, I'll leave the link to that episode for this, and then I can also just put a link to your general website and all that. We'll hell at the end. Yeah, along those lines, we had someone in that same district where all that happened. There was an officer a few years ago who worked a wreck and kind of noticed that there was a smell going on at the back of one of the cars, and he asked permission for one of the officers to open up the trunk of the car. Opens up the trunk, there's a dead body in the trunk. And the dude had killed his girlfriend and was just riding around with her body. He was just sitting there desiccating in the trunk of the car. Yeah, just off a normal, like no injuries wreck.
Right.
The point that I want to stress here, that with this, telling all these stories, is that, we as police officers, this is something I've talked about before, is that we are the intercessor between all the bad stuff that happens in the public. So, criminals, quote unquote, or even just like bad events. So, like, natural disasters. Here we have tornadoes, and the general public, right? So, if there's something real bad going on, cops gonna be there no matter what's going on. And one of the things that we do is that are not only like, do we hear these things happen, right? We see these things happen. We smell these things. We touch these things. We unfortunately sometimes we taste these things.
Yeah.
And that is something that I have noticed about our faith in so much as that when we worship Christ, right? When we want to glorify Him, we have God has given us essentially 5 vehicles to interact with the world, right? We have our 5 senses. We have touch, taste, smell, hearing, and sight. That I think for a cop, especially using all 5 of those senses makes sense because we use our bodies. We're not just an intellectual people. Like we are, a physical people. Our bodies matter, right?
Right.
And so, having this is something that one of our previous guests talk about is that we literally want to taste Christ, right? In communion. Have you noticed that, kind of like talking to a bunch of different cops, that there is a sense in which, like, we're not just living in our heads, we're actually out there in the world? Do you have any thoughts about that, any observations from talking to hundreds of different cops?
Yeah, I'm always like delighted when I'm doing an interview if I don't know beforehand, if they say a couple phrases that tease me off that they're a Christian. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
The denomination doesn't matter, like we said before, but the fact that they will always in the interview sprout up to how they successfully processed it and how it put their mind at peace. So I don't think, like you were saying, about Chesterton said, and like C.S. Lewis said too, he said, man is a vehicle that was designed to run on Christ. And humans want to do nothing more than it's like putting diesel into a gasoline motor. We want to run on ourselves. And the machine putts a few times and then falls over. And that's civilization. And it just keeps happening. That's the cycle. So yeah, the guys that I interview that do have faith, they seem to be much more at peace with the job. I think it's the cops I run into in real life and in the show that don't. A lot of them have outlets they consider healthy, like they do yoga or they meditate or they play an instrument or I won't tell you where I stand on all those things, but I think playing an instrument is great. Like it's some of that stuff's fine, but it's like that they still have that. To me, they might not feel, but to me, it's like hopelessness, because it's like they're retiring to get away from all the hopelessness they've seen, and it's kind of like baggage on them. And I don't see a way to process that without there being a God, without an intelligent mind, a creator.
Yeah. Without understanding that there's a greater purpose for this life, right?
And like you said, your vocation is part of your works. I mean, it's what you do that's godly. That's a do your job and do it well, whether you're a police officer or a janitor or a teacher. It should be Christ driven.
Yeah. And this even rolls into what you do, right? Like on top of you doing your job as a sergeant for your department, this, I think, is contributing to your podcast. It does contribute to not only just other police officers, but people as a whole, being able to, I think part of it is, I would be shocked if some police officers, like you interview them, you almost feel like you're doing therapy with them, right? Because you're there, sitting there and going through all these different things that, that they've
Absolutely.
seen, right? On top of that, you by collecting these stories are contributing to, the greater story here, right? Like, and hopefully as Christians, Our lives should be oriented to glorify Christ, and there are many ways in which that we can do that. You have a podcast. I'm trying to have a podcast, but we also do other things outside of that. You and I both have families, and being a good dad is part of that. It helps gives us purpose. But just like being a police officer, we're not perfect dads, right?
Right.
I'm not perfect cops. I will 100% tell you, I am not the perfect police officer. I'm not the perfect dad. I'm not. One of the things that I do outside of all this is I help instruct a couple of different things. I'm not the perfect instructor. Or even though those things that are just not police related at all, I'm not the perfect X, Y, and Z, but hopefully, when I'm doing these practices, I have to keep in mind that I'm doing them in the end to glorify God, and as long as that is the goal, then I'm at peace, right?
Absolutely.
So along those lines, have you noticed how your podcast, have you seen any ways in which you believe that your podcast and collecting all these stories has contributed to the kingdom of God? And it's a very small way for you to work towards that. But have you noticed anything along those lines while doing this podcast? Of anyone ever told you anything, or you just kind of noticed something, or you might go ahead and expand to that.
Great question, man. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say I love that. It's beautiful the way you put it, but that will be my new way to look at it. I mean, everything we do should be like that, but I never really thought about it that way. And there is things, I get emails, a lot of emails. You'll see once you get a bunch of people listening, you'll get emails all the time. And I've gotten emails from people, and believe it or not, they're not Christian, or even they're more like agnostic, or they don't believe. And I was always nervous when I started the podcast. I did here and there. I never hid my faith, but I never really made it part of the conversation. Now it's like, if I see a crack, I'll talk about Christ. Like I'll talk about my faith and how it's benefited me, how it saved me. And I'll get these emails from people, and they'll be like, "Hey, I'm not Christian. I don't have a religion, but I really like that you talk about it." And those are the emails to me where I'm like, weird. They're like, it's just something nice about somebody with, it's commendable that you have that Christian faith, and that it's like you adhere to it and you believe it. Yeah. People like to hear that. And I have to believe that that's got into their heart. You know what I mean? Like they're hearing that, and it's making them think. It's at least planting a seed, because they like the show. They seemingly like me, and they hear what drives me, And besides that, I get just emails just from straight up Christians who are like, "I'm so happy to hear somebody who has an outlet that doesn't shy away from talking about Christ." That I don't. I mean, it's like sometimes I feel like it's, oh man, I really talked for a while about it, but then I'm like, you know what? I'm happy to. I can't worry about turning people off. I mean, that's an honor, right? In Scripture, it says the world's going to reject you. So I've even gotten emails from people that I've gotten emails from people in the gay community who said they can't listen anymore if I'm going to talk about not, supporting pride or trans issues or whatever. And I don't take offense. It's, I don't believe in it. It's against my religion. I think it's against the truth. So nothing I can do about it. I even get emails sometimes when people say, I think you're proselytizing too much. You should back it down. Like you're going to lose people because people don't want to hear it. And I just wrote back, I probably will. I welcome that. I don't care. Yeah. It's like, I'm not going to be ashamed.
The words of Saint Athanasius, the world stands against Christ and I stand against the world.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. Like that. Yeah. That is, part of doing this for me is, I was kind of concerned, a little bit of a background into, how I got in law enforcement. I wanted to do something with my hands along with doing things with my head. So
you wanted to pull that trigger.
Do I? I wanted to interact with, I wanted to interact with the world and not just academia. So I really thought I was going to go into academia coming out of college.
It's funny, William, can I say that you, the way you talk and like your mannerisms and the amount of knowledge you have about a lot of things, you kind of remind me of a few pastors that I know. So it kind of makes sense to me because like in the Lutheran faith anyway, education's a huge thing, and all the pastors like go to a big long school. So yeah, I see that.
Well, thank you. But I wanted to interact with the world not just through my head. I wanted to interact, with my body. And being a police officer is something that you're not just in your head. You're doing stuff. You're out there interacting with the world. And on top of that, I thought that I wanted to go in and hopefully one day work for a state or a federal level agency. So I wasn't trying to make waves or say anything controversial because I wanted to get hired. But I'm at the point now where if I know what I'm doing is not being mean. I'm not saying anything mean spirited. I'm not saying anything to go drive someone to do something really bad. I'm trying to help police officers especially, but other people that may be trying to find their purpose in life and inside of their job, to find it in Christ, able to transfer that. But I think police officers especially, we'll get into that in just a second, police officers especially can try to find their purpose in life in their job and how to direct, because this is something I saw whenever my department is that people would try to find their purpose in their job, and you can't do that. And I'm gonna talk about that in just a minute. But I decided that I was tired of sitting around and kind of just I'm not going to say anything because maybe this agency won't hire me, or maybe X, Y, and Z. I'm at the point where, what is what it is. If someone doesn't hire me because of what I'm saying, okay, that's fine. And I think that this message is more important than a paycheck or a better job. But the point, the whole reason this whole thing started is I noticed that, especially coming from someone who has a very sacramental faith, being a police officer is, in some ways, it is quasi sacramental. We do certain things that are religion-esque. They're not religious, they're religion-esque. They're like religion. And we've talked about this before. When we have halls of the dead, like we have pictures of police officers in our agency that have died in the line of duty.
Saints.
And yeah, exactly. Saints, our version of saints. Or we have we talked about this again. We have relics. I've talked about over and over the encased duty belt that we have of one of the police officers that died in the line of duty in our department.
Sure.
But we also have a rank and an order to our department. On top of that, police officers have to have a moral sense. We know that we're fighting towards something. We're fighting towards order. We're fighting towards not, getting rid of the chaos, getting rid of the crime, and that's a good thing. It is not the good thing. It is not our purpose, our telos in life, but it is a good thing to do. So it's religion-esque. And I have even noticed in the past couple of years, police officers especially, I'm kind of hesitant to use this word, but we're in some ways we're persecuted now because I know a couple of people that won't talk to me anymore because I'm a police officer.
Yeah.
Or you get judged because explicitly just because of the job that you do. And so that has kind of even more I've noticed that has built some kind of camaraderie in our department between each other, that overrides how personally you may not like someone, because we know that it's not as bad where I am, but in some places the demons are at the gates. The demons are going in and burning down
precincts.
Yeah, burning down precincts, defunding entire police departments. And so there's like all these religious-esque elements, but if you're a police officer and you're listening to this, I want you to get across that this is a good thing, but it is not the good thing. It is, and you are only going to find a true peace in knowing your purpose in life by understanding that at the end of the day, it may be a day, tomorrow, 100 years, 1,000 years, but understanding that Christ has died on the cross and he is coming again to redeem all of us, to judge all of us. That is the only way that we can find that we can find hope, because it ends this circular view of the world. It ends this view that we're always going to be chaotic, and we're always going to fight. We're always going to have the same problems in the world, and that life is just this circular motion. It makes everything an arrow, right? We have a beginning and we have an end, and that's only where you can find peace.
Absolutely. Man was made to worship and to worship and glorify God. So if you're not worshiping, glorifying God, if you don't have Christ, then it will become your job or some other thing. It will be your total obsession,
And it can't be, that we can't find, this job is not our purpose. It's a good thing, keep being a cop, we need more people doing it. But if you're at that point in your like the way you only think about police stuff and you're a cop 24/7, that's just not good for you. That is a disordered life. And I'm sure that you've seen plenty of people across the spectrum, or like for all the people you've interviewed. I know you've kept up with a few of them. I mean, I'm sure there's some people that are cop all the time, or even there's people in your department that are cop all the time. But there's, at the end of the day, there's no hope in that, unfortunately. Yeah. You have any thoughts?
No, I agree, and you do see it in police work, because it is one of those. It's a noble ancient profession that you can really tie your buggy to. You can let it envelop your whole life. You can. I mean, there's right down to the statutes. You're a police officer 24 hours a day. You can walk out of your house, make an arrest in plain clothes. You can really take that on. You can really. I know guys that are cuffs, badge, and gun off duty. They're ready to go, and they will do it. I'm afraid they would do it with a kid with them. You know what I mean? They're that into what they're doing, and like you said, there's no separation from who they are. It's just and it comes from a maybe twisted, but like good place. Like they think this is my ultimate purpose, so I'm going to do it to the nth degree, and those people become great Christians when they're called. They're they have the heart for it. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, we're getting close to the end here. One of the things that I wanted to get into, because you're all the time interviewing other people, but you're hardly interviewed. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you, because you asked this on your podcast, I wanted to ask it to you. What is the craziest story that you have from your personal career?
All right. There's a few to pick from. I'm going to go with like more of like a humorous kind of crazy one, because I really like this story. So it's St. Patty's midnight shift, overnight shift, just me and a sergeant and another patrolman on. And this was when I worked on the coast of Cape Cod, and we get this call that there's a guy driving. There's sparks coming from his wheels going down the highway. So St. Patty's, I'm like, all right, guys, probably obviously drunk. We have big granite curbings, so probably hit that. By the time I find him, he's far southern part of town, and he's driven into, we had a big rotary at the south end of town where it went into the town below us. Cape is like linear because there's no the bordering towns are, there's ocean on either side, so you can only go one way. So this is south, and he's driven right up over the curbing into the rotary area is a couple 300 feet wide. In the middle, there's a marsh. Used to be Jeremiah's Gutter. So if you look at old literature, old history, the British actually came through there from Rock Harbor over to the town Cove and Orleans. So it was like a canal, a small canal you could use to get from the ocean to the bay, Cape Cod Bay. So anyways, we filled that all in, built a rotary and a highway and put a Wendy's there and the whole thing. And now there's like a marsh. And the last part of Jeremiah's Gutter is this marsh in the middle of it. And we always say, people, you're going to kill somebody, throw them into that marsh. So he almost makes it to that. So I come up to him and he's all disheveled, shirt's buttoned wrong. His teeth are all stained purple, from drinking wine. And he's like this, he's really small, this kind of like scraggly beard, disheveled hair, and he's clearly intoxicated. And I go, how you doing? What happened? And he's like, I got lost here on Cape Cod. And I can't figure out where I'm going. I went someplace I shouldn't have went, and they didn't. I was rejected, and I can't find my way home. I'm like, okay. So at this point, I've had enough of the story. I'm like, I'll get the rest from him later. Field sobriety bombs, arrest him. So he starts telling me in the ride back to the station, well, if I'm being honest, I do a lot of surfing on couple swap pages. I'm like, yeah. He's like, yeah. So like, there's some guys that really like to, share their wife. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I'm like, He's like, well, I got there and I guess they didn't really like me, but they felt bad. So we drank like 3 bottles of wine, and then the husband kicked me out, made me leave. So I'm feeling really bad for the guy at this point. I'm like, first of all, your lifestyle is trash. You can't even make it in the cuckolding scene. Like, you're being rejected. Yeah. So my sergeant does an inventory in the car, and in the car, I fingerprint him with the other officer. We book and put him in a cell. And my sergeant's like, why don't you come into the interview room? I want to show you what I found in this car. So he shows me, there is our interview room's like 8 by 10. The entire place is filled with sex toys. Like anything you can imagine. One of them like screws onto the top of a champagne bottle. I'm like, what is this disaster? And then he had a little USB keychain with his keys. And of course, this is before they even started talking about needing a warrant for this stuff. So I just plugged it in the computer, and it's all these agreements or waivers for all kinds of, like, you can imagine deviant sexual encounters. Yeah. And the guy basically looks like a troll. So it's like, I wonder if this has ever worked out for this guy. And long story short, he was so embarrassed that he just pled out. He didn't want to go. His brother was a lawyer, but he didn't want to go to trial because he didn't want everybody to hear about it. So that was kind of like a really bizarre and funny story, I thought. The other one, well, I don't want to go too over the top, like too gory. I mean, it's up to you, but
I'll stop you if it gets too bad.
Okay. Well, we had a car, like, this one's more just like sad. We had a car on the highway up north, just left a bar. I was at a B&E investigation, and the crime scene guy was there taking pictures. We get this call about this bad car wreck, and we get there, and the highway's kind of built up at this point, and then about 15 feet below, there's a arcade and family restaurant thing and parking spots, and there's a Miata perfectly in one of the parking spaces down below, and I can see my partners down there already. And as I'm looking at the car, and I can see that it's banged up. I'm like, what is going on? They said it was a wreck, but this thing is like, the music's on, the headlights are on. It's a convertible Miata. And as I'm walking to get close to the car, I'm on the far side of the building. It's kind of a long building. and there's this couple there up against the building. The woman's face is, the face, just like green, white, just washed out. Like she's gonna go down. And I said, "Are you guys okay?" Before I'm even at the scene, I'm like, "Are you okay?" And the husband told me really quickly, we're actually both psychiatrists. We live in Boston, and he's like, this car went off that guardrail and corkscrewed in the air and landed in that parking spot. And what's inside the car is why my wife is passing out. And I'm like, good to know. So I make sure she has a seat, so she doesn't hit the pit. Now we have two problems, I walk over to my buddy, and there's this 22-year-old girl, and her body is still in the car, but she had her belt on. So when it rolled over, her body's all broken around the top of the seat, just like from a horror movie, And what happened was she was buckled in, and when she corkscrewed the first time, she hit her head, because she's in the convertible, on the pavement, and it just knocked the top of her head off.
Oh.
So, and she's there, and I'll never forget, like, Shania Twain is blaring. It's like, it's surreal, you know what I mean? And the car's like starting to smoke, and I'll never forget, there was a time of year when people started to use their wood stoves. So the neighbors across the highway, the wood stove was kind of like going down into the little depression we were in. And that smell for years, every time I smelled a wood stove, I thought about this. So she's
the smells, right? Once again, people, the smells actually mean something, right? Sorry, keep going.
Absolutely, yeah. So so then we get there, and that's what we have. And then so we're kind of, me and my buddy are like, well, and then the sergeant shows up. So there's three of us, and we're like, well, we'll get accident recon on the way, and paramedics to pronounce her, and the whole thing. And then we're sitting there, and I'm talking with the sergeant, and he's like, need you to do something, need you to do the notification. I'm like, okay. He says, she's up the town north of us, need you to go tell her mom. It's her mom's car, she borrowed it for the night. Girl drives a big, like, Suburban. She borrowed mom's little Miata because it's fun. Got hammered at a local bar. So I go up there, and luckily another officer was on up there. It's smaller communities. He came with me, and we knocked on the door. This is probably, I've done a bunch of death notifications, but nothing like this immediate and someone this young. And I knock on the door, and it's her mom. And like a lot of people, like when you give a death notification, there's this light shock that kind of goes over them. Either they can explode and break down, or they kind of look at you like, what? And you have to repeat it. So we went and sat down on the couch with the mom, and she starts asking questions like, should I call into work tomorrow? Should I call out? Like, do you think I'll be able to go to work? And I'm like, she's clearly just like discombobulated. While we're talking, a 4-year-old comes out of the bedroom, and it's the girl who died's kid. And it was we spent like an hour there helping her make phone calls and trying to save it later for her to tell the kid. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to, like, I'm not going to tell the kid too. Like, so that was one of those calls where it's like just an ordinary night on patrol. I was at a B&E, and then this event happened that was like, it bothered me. We debriefed about it and everything, but that bothered me for some time.
Yeah. It's the nights and the calls that you never think anything's going to go down, that it really goes down.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Well, Steve, if you could answer 2 questions for me in one, where can we find your podcast, your show, all that? That's number one. The second one is, do you have any parting words, final advice to our listeners?
Yeah, I can do both those. Podcast is easy. thingspolice.com. It's a website I maintain, has all the stuff. If you want to be a guest, I'm always looking for more coppers. We'll hit you up again for some friends. Yeah. You can scroll down. All the episodes are there. And then it's everywhere you can get podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Google.
And I'll include a link in in this episode. So, we got you covered there.
Oh, thank you. And what I would say is, for parting advice, I'll make twofold, if that's okay. For podcasters, I'd like to talk to. If you have a mission like you're just starting out on, or you have something you really believe in, you'll get your audience. You'll find the people that need to hear it. I believe that. My podcast struggled for a few years, but I found now I have this network of people. And it's really, I get emails from people that like were on the fence about being a cop and listen to you guys tell your stories. I mean, I hear stories that are like, my stories are, I hope they were all right, but they're nothing compared to what some of these people come on and tell. It's like some people tell stories. I'm like, could I even live through that? You know what I mean? Their good stuff is ridiculous, but I'll get an email and the person will be like, yeah, I wasn't going to do it. And then I just heard all these people talk about it, and I'm in Academy right now. And that's the best email, cause, they almost treat it like a ride along. You know what I mean? They really love the show that way. And then I would say for police officers, I would say just, we're all investigators, right? From patrolman to whatever rank. You owe it to yourself to at least investigate the resurrection. At least look into historical documents. Look at all the times the Bible was proved right by archaeology. Look at all the times science thought it had the Bible, and then the Bible proved itself again. It's happened so many times. The historicity of the resurrection in Christian and secular world is there. There's no real good explanation for all these people doing this and dying for it unless they saw it. And don't not look into it. Just take a look at it and question the bigger things in life. Get off your rails a little bit and really think about, where's your life headed? What's the fun? Because if the point really is just to get a job and make money and like spend all your hours you're not working just for pleasure, for carnal pleasure, then there's really no point to anything. And what's to stop somebody from just like selling children as sex slaves? So what do you care? What's your bearing? What do you really believe in? So
why are you doing your job?
Right. Yeah. So I would say that is, I don't want to be, over the top, but it's like, I wish people would do that, because it's really life-changing. And I know there's detectives out there, homicide detectives. I've written books. One of them's in California, who looked deeply into the resurrection and is now like a very faithful Christian. So don't think you have it all figured out, because I'm guarantee you there's people, I know for a fact there's people much smarter and have much more worldly wisdom than you that came to the truth.
Yeah. That's something that I have to stress over and over to myself and other people, is that people who are much smarter than both you and I have believed these things, and there's a good reason for that. Aquinas, C.S. Lewis. I mean, you could just go down everywhere in history. There are many people way more smarter than both you and I that have believed these things. Steve, huge thanks to you for coming on. Remember, if you want to find this podcast, you can look up Remaining Sane PC at Twitter. That's at Remaining Sane PC. Or you can email remainingsanepodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that's remainingsanepodcast@gmail.com. Have a blessed rest of your day.